Hey everyone, welcome back to the AI show.
Hi, nice to see everyone here.
Awesome. So I guess we have had an exciting week, and obviously every week in AI is kind of exciting. So yeah, if you were to only track like one thread in AI this week, it would be China because of Kimi. We had two multi-trillion parameter open models land within days of each other, and obviously China's leader Xi Jinping's speech backing open source as basically national strategy was also the highlight. And we're going to cover all of that. So excited to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to try to keep the temperature down because a lot of this got framed as a panic online. And the more interesting read is a bit calmer than that. But let's start with the model that kicked it off first.
Yeah. Do you wanna get started with Kimi and the big
Yes,
launch?
just pull up the screenshot. Let's get into it. So Moonshot released Kimi K3, as we all saw. And by their own benchmarks, it goes toe to toe with the best US frontier models. It trails only Claude Fable 5 and GPT 5.6, and artificial analysis actually ranked it ahead of Anthropic's Opus 4.8 on some of the tests. So it's a 2.8 trillion parameter model, and Moonshot is calling it the world's first open 3 trillion class model built for frontier coding, knowledge work, and reasoning. So that makes this one land differently from the usual Chinese lab catches up headline in your view. What do you think, Dee?
Yeah, in my view, for sure. I feel there are like a few things that really land differently here. First, it's open weight, obviously, which means anyone can download and run for free once the weights release. They're releasing on the July 27th, based on what they mentioned. Open weight and open source are a little different. So you get the model itself, but not the training data or the entire recipe behind it. So that's one. And the second one, I would say it's aimed straight at coding, which is also something that I personally feel that Claude was able to kind of like really take over OpenAI, back in like say when it all started and OpenAI was kind of leading the race and Claude was able to take over this entire race because they really focused on coding, right? So
Yeah.
this is what Kimi is doing as well. It's aimed straight at coding, which is one of the most lucrative parts of the market, which is what we've seen in the past. And Moonshot is pricing it around Claude Sonnet levels rather than undercutting the way other Chinese labs have, which we've heard and talked about. I think which is itself a signal about how confident they are in the quality. And lastly, I feel this is a bit different. Is the hardware around it because running K3 takes serious compute. So in practice, it's within reach of well-resourced firms and not just like wipe coders, etc. So yeah, and there is like a lot of outside validation on the coding claim as well. So it's not only just the moonshot numbers, right? So you know what we recently saw is let me put that. Yeah, Kimi K3 hit number one in the front-end code arena with 1,679 points, passing Claude Fable 5, and that's like a 17 place jump from the previous K2.6 model, right, from Kimi, with
Yeah.
number 18. So yeah, it basically took the top spot in 6 of 7 front-end domains, including brand and marketing, reference-based design, data analytics, consumer product, and whatnot. And it landed second only in gaming, which is behind Fable 5. So yeah, that's what we saw, which is super interesting.
Yeah, and one thing I would flag for anyone listening is that most of the headline performance claims still come from Moonshot's own benchmarking. So the leaderboard result is useful because it's a third party, but the broader beats everyone except two models framing is worth treating as impressive and not yet fully confirmed, though. So there's also some baggage worth naming because the US State Department leveled AI theft accusations at several Chinese firms earlier this year, and that includes Moonshot.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's worth noting, and we'll kind of like track it what happens next. In terms of like uh, demand on Kimi, we obviously saw that it kind of like went crazy. And in the 48 hours after launch, Kimi K3 pushed close to the limits of Moonshot's current GPU capacity. So they have officially temporarily paused new subscriptions to protect existing subscribers and prioritize compute for current members and not like kind of bring in new ones. So that kind of shows that the demand kind of like went crazy, and then we're going to keep watching on when they kind of get back and the official launch on the 27th of July.
Absolutely. And the cool thing is that existing users, as you mentioned, aren't affected and they'll reopen new spots in batches as capacity comes online. So they're also splitting the membership into two plans, one for web, app, and work, and a separate one for Kimi Code membership for coding workflows so they can match compute more precisely, which is a good problem to have if you're them, and a decent tell that the interest is real rather than just launch week noise.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel that especially because it's aimed at coding, a lot of people must have like gotten onto the bandwagon and tried using it, and which kind of clearly shows that the interest has gone up. Cool. I think we China's kind of like leading
Yeah,
this.
and actually, yeah, the second segment is quite interesting because Moonshot didn't get to keep the moment for long because Alibaba came in right behind them.
Yeah, that's right. The Qwen team from Alibaba announced that the Qwen 3.8 preview is now live, claiming kind of broad gains and a big step up on web front end, or with a more capable version still to come. So I think outside coverage from some media reports have also framed it as a 2.4 trillion parameter multimodal model, positioned as second only to Claude Fable 5, which is huge. And Alibaba has said open weights are coming really soon.
Yeah, so maybe the way that I would frame this is that it's a pattern because within days you had Kimi K3 and then Qwen 3.8 Max, both in the multi-trillion parameter class and both going open weight. So that's what hot model summer actually looks like on the ground.
Yay! It's definitely the AI summer.
Yeah,
I would
we
say
can feel the heat.
I would say there's one caveat that kind of I would point out. Um, Alibaba put out the second only to Fable 5 framing without publishing benchmark data. I guess at least I haven't seen or license details yet. I'm still gonna like dig up if this is already live. And readers and X kind of keep circling back to those missing numbers, which I saw as well. So it's a real release and a clear signal of intent. And at the same time, the specific capability claims are, kind of like unverified for now, I would say, which fits the broader caution that a lot of this week's news is running ahead, basically ahead of independent confirmation. So we all gonna wait for that, but it's nonetheless it's kind of exciting.
Absolutely. A lot of stuff are happening in Asia currently.
Awesome. Let's move on to a very natural kind of question, which would really excite or kind of panic the other parts of the world. So I would say the natural question, next question, after these launches would be whether the US labs should actually be worried. And there was a recent very interesting argument from Ben Thompson. He's obviously an American business technology and analyst, and he wrote the sharpest pushback on why US shouldn't really panic. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, his piece is called Who's Afraid of Chinese Models? And his core argument is that open weight does not mean cheap to serve. R&D is still a fixed cost, but inference is the real cost of goods sold. And he doubts Chinese models are actually cheaper to run or on a marginal cost basis. He also points out in his piece that Kimi K3 reportedly burns far more reasoning tokens than a model like Soul to reach the same answer, which chips away at its apparent price edge.
Yeah, that's an interesting read. I think I would encourage users to kind of point this out in real time if this is happening. And yeah, and then like you said, his read on why the US labs look expensive is interesting based on what he points out, because he ties it to the supplier rather than to the models themselves, right? So I guess right now the US labs are so compute constrained that they're charging under a price umbrella, and Anthropic and OpenAI likely have the lowest true cost per unit of frontier intelligence thanks to scale and token efficiency, basically. So that's basically what he's saying.
I'm curious. So, where does he think the genuine anxiety comes from if it isn't economics?
Yeah, partly anchoring on old training cost economics and partly positioning, because open weights kind of undercut Anthropic's only we can be trusted with AI kind of like a stance, right? And on China's side, he frames the open source push as classic commoditize your compliments, which is also something that we'll talk about. That China's leader kind of like mentioned something around these lines in the AI conference, since cheap models feed China's real lead in robotics and the physical world. So I think that's where partly the anxiety is coming from. What do you think?
Yeah, and maybe the one thing that he says people should actually worry about is cybersecurity, which is a nice handoff to a story we'll get to a bit later, because he points to Higgins face getting breached and falling back on a Chinese open model after U.S. frontier guardrails locked out their own defenders. So his takeaway is that US policy is nudging defenders towards Chinese models, and he thinks that's backwards. So the balance for us is that the leaderboards and the demands say China is closing the gap, and the sharper economic read says frontier US labs are still functionally fine.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess which kind of brings us to
The next story.
this really interesting story, where China is definitely pushing for these things, right? So um yeah, and then when the president comes and talks about it, you can't really separate any of these releases from the politics. So yeah, he kind of used the World AI Conference in Shanghai to make his clearest pitch yet for China to lead a new global AI order, and this is like one of the sharpest pitches that I've heard him talk in recent times. Um, what do you think about this, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, and he seems to be quite confident about it. He positioned open source as the path forward and framed China's models as a global public good and basically urged countries to seize the open source moment. So he also pledged to help developing nations build their own AI capabilities. and warned against what he called new historical injustices from unequal access, which
Yeah.
is just like chips a little bit like plays with what the US are doing with policies and yeah,
Yeah,
what
and
we
then
covered in previous weeks basically.
absolutely, and then it's getting like explicitly geopolitical at this time because he kind of floated a channel-led World AI Cooperation Organization as a rival to the US-led effort, and pointedly left the US out of that coalition, from what I'm hearing. He also made his first extended remarks on AI safety, and he compared AI significance to the steam engine and electricity and these use cases. So, yeah, definitely very ambitious thoughts here that he put out.
Actually, it's also like really the connective tissue for the whole segment that we covered so far, because the Kimi K3 and Qwen releases start to look like the technical proof points behind the national strategy. So basically, Thompson's commoditize your complement points maps almost exactly onto she's pushing open source as statecraft. And that lets us zoom out from one impressive model to a coordinated bid to set the rules.
Absolutely. It's very interconnected, like you said. Awesome.
So
Okay, I
let's see.
think there've been like lots of interesting things that are being discussed around this, and even on this entire open source theme. So yeah, we're gonna talk about talk a little bit about David Sachs, and he's definitely someone on the US side making a version of the same open source argument, just from national competitiveness rather than from like a China's angle or a competition in that sense. Yeah, so I think it's worth
Yeah.
over what he says.
Well, his framing is cost asymmetry. So he argues that if the US closes the door on open source, American companies would be forced to pay $26 to $56 per million tokens for the same intelligence their competitors abroad get for 50 cents to a dollar. So he calls that economically unsustainable. And his line is, unless AI is bullshit, meaning if AI is really the true line of the future economy we've told it is, then you can't hand US companies that kind of cost disadvantage.
Absolutely. This is super interesting, and it kind of makes sense because he also pushes it into the military lens a little bit, because he says letting adversaries attack for 50 cents per million tokens while the US spends 26 to $56 to defend itself is, in his words, quote unquote, the Cold War Soviet collapse in reverse. So his related point is that gatekeeping models doesn't really work, and the answer is AI powered cyber defense.
Yeah, so the way this book ends with Thompson is that they arrive at the same place from different roles. So one from cost structure and the Higgins phase incident, and the other from national competitiveness and defense. So the true line we can voice is that the open source versus frontier debate has moved out of the labs and into US policy, with serious people arguing that locking models down would cost America more than it costs China. And we can see this happening.
Definitely. Yeah, and then the Hugging Face incident is interesting because it happens right at the time when this is being discussed, and we'll get to
Exactly.
that in a minute. And I had to like bring this up in today's live stream because this gets really interesting. The this an interesting article on from New York Times on Google, because there's like a the story is about how AI is changing the shape of the open web, and it's about Google, and this is something that a lot of like marketing teams and GDM teams have been trying to figure out the answer to. So yeah, talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, it's very controversial. I came across several articles on the topic how Google tries to maintain the traffic like within its own systems and its own tools. So this new New York Times investigation suggests that Google is moving from a traffic directing search engine towards more of a walled garden, using AI to keep users on its own surfaces rather than sending them out to the wider web. So Google says its AI features still drive billions of clicks to outside sites. So that's their position. But many SEO specialists actually see a drop down of click through rates for quite a few of their clients and websites.
Yeah, maybe worth kind of like bringing some of these on in the next few weeks. But like you said, the data others are seeing, including what you said, a lot of like these SEO specialists, it kind of tells a different story um, because recently Bright Edge and Cloudflare point to a 30 to 58% drop in click-through rates, and that's also happening for like smaller companies, like you said, for informational queries after AI overviews were rolled out.
Yeah.
And the tension for publishers is definitely real and very concerning because they face reduced visibility if they opt out of having their content used to train Google's AI models, right? So it becomes a hard choice between protecting your content and staying discoverable. um,
Yeah, which is actually a slower moving story than the model releases, and it's arguably the one with the biggest long term effect on anyone who makes a living publishing on the open web.
yeah, I'm glad we brought this up today, and we're going to continue to see what happens. It's already pulling a lot of interesting conversations on Twitter, so we're going to continue to track this one. And now let's get to the Hugging Face incident that I would say is is a bit concerning, and like
Yeah.
the it kind of closes the loop on the cyber defense threat as well that we've been talking about. And this is a story that made the whole abstract debate concrete, right? So Hugging Face disclosed recently, I think about 4 days back, that attackers broke into part of its production infrastructure. And the thing that made it different is that the attack was run end to end by an autonomous AI agent system, and they detected and dissected it largely with AI of their own. So yeah, this is
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, walk through how it actually unfolded because the mechanics matter here, I think.
Definitely. I think it definitely connects to this entire topic. It started in the data processing pipeline, where a malicious data set abused two code execution paths to kind of run code on a processing worker. And from there, it escalated to node level access, harvested cloud and cluster credentials, and moved laterally across internal clusters over a weekend. That's what they've reported. And the agent framework executed many thousands of actions across a swarm of short lived sandboxes. On the reassuring side, however, they found no evidence that public models, data sets, or spaces were tampered with, and the software supply chain verified clean. So, what do you
Yeah.
think of this entire incident?
Yeah, I think that the detail that ties it to everything else that we covered this week is what they called the asymmetry problem. When their team went to analyze the attack, they first tried frontier models behind commercial APIs, and those requests got blocked because submitting real attack commands and exploit payloads stripped the provider's safety guardrails. So, which can tell if it's actually an incident responder or an attacker. So, they ran the forensic analysis on GOM 5.2, an open weight Chinese model, on their own infrastructure. And that had a second benefit because no attacker data or credentials left their environment. So they reconstructed the timeline from more than 17,000 recorded events in hours instead of days.
Yeah, and this is the moment where, Thompson's point that we discussed and David Sachs' points kind of like become very real, because here is an actual company that got hit by an AI-driven attack and found its user-friendly models locking it out of defending itself. So it reached for an open weight model instead. So their own stated lesson is that defenders should have a capable model they can run on their own infrastructure, vetted and ready before an incident like this kind of occurs.
Yeah, and to be fair to the labs, Hugging Face framed this as not an argument against safety measures, and they're sharing the feedback with the providers. So it reads as a guardrail design problem rather than a claim that safety itself is wronged. So that's a distinction worth keeping, because it's easy to turn this into a story about safety being pointless, and that's not what they said.
Absolutely. Well, I guess we're gonna keep watching this incident and what kind of like postmortem reports kind of come up if they do. Moving on to our favorite topic on the enterprise AI, which is something that I really love in terms of giving enterprises like better costs overall. So I recently read the story on Runway, and we've spent a lot of time on capability and geopolitics, and it's interesting to kind of move on to on the ground and what's actually what this actually does inside a company, right? Because that's what's a real big use case. So Runway put out some interesting numbers on the enterprise side. Their co-founder and CEO Cristobal says a review of enterprise customers found media production costs dropping by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude after they adopted Runway's AI video tools, which is
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Give me the concrete examples, because 2 to 3 orders of magnitude is abstract until you actually see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading his article that he shared on Twitter, which I've also like put it out here. The anonymized examples are striking that he calls out. Broadcast commercial that reportedly went from more than $5 million to somewhere around 3,000 or $4,000, and visual projects that fell from $800,000 to under $10,000, which is extreme, right? So Runway
Yeah.
frames these as showing up across advertising, gaming, broadcast, and film production companies.
So what does the enterprise actually get moment? Because all the model news is about who's ahead and what the policy fight looks like. And Runway grounds it in a real workflow where budgets are collapsing by 100x or more. And the caveat I'd say out loud is that these are the company's own anonymized customer figures. So they're the best case examples rather than just an audited average. So we treat them as directional.
Yeah, definitely. And even if you discount them heavily, a commercial growing from millions to thousands is the kind of number that kind of changes what an enterprise media budget is going to look like in the future. So the direction matters here. The direction here matters quite a bit, even though the exact figures could be a little here and there.
Absolutely.
Cool. That's kind of like a close. So if you kind of, it was an interesting week in terms of like how we talked about two major Chinese open models came out, and it looked like a pretty much a national strategy behind them, and then
Yeah.
the security incident happening. So yeah, the capability gap, like we said, is closing, but it's getting very interesting in terms of like how everyone's looking at each of these models and each of these updates.
Yeah, and we'll keep tracking the follow through since Kimi K3 weights land on the 27th, as we mentioned, and
Yeah.
Qwen's benchmarks are still outstanding. So we'll have real numbers to come back to next time. And thanks for spending this time with us.
Definitely. Thanks for listening. See you soon.